Well, thanks very much. Thanks for joining me and also for inviting me to talk about this. As Gordon's mentioned, most of the work that the CMA has done has been in the consumer protection space. So what I have to say is mainly focused on that, because that's where our experience and our insights have been. But I'll also cover something about the law which governs business-to-business advertising as well, because that's another important area. Just a few words about myself. I'm a legal director at the CMA. I've been doing quite a lot of enforcement work in this area and around social media endorsements, but also about fake reviews and a whole load of other bits and pieces, as well as other areas of our practice. So I have some slides and I'll try to share them. I should say, if people have questions or comments, I think you can make them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and I'll try and engage with things if they as they come up. Otherwise, here are some slides. So yeah, so I'm talking about influencer marketing and the law kind of generally. And I think it's fair to say that when people make shopping decisions, they're going to have different influences on them. And, you know, ideally they would be good influences. So people think about the price, the range of items, the quality and the service they're going to get. Those are the classic things that people compare. And you know, as a competition regulator, the CMA likes to think of people competing on those things. But sometimes people also have bad influences, and those could include fake reviews, where you suppress negative reviews and hidden advertising. And that's true whether your target is a consumer or a business customer. And of course, the result, if people are influenced more by those sort of fake reviews than by other things, is that you get bad value for the customer at the end, because they're not getting necessarily what they think they're going to get. They're going to be disappointed. Competition is affected, because instead of competing on price and giving people a great deal and you know, producing something which really people want, people are increasingly going to compete on how slick their advertising can be, or how cunning they can be in hiding it. And of course, all of this leads to a loss of trust in influencer marketing, and you know, as a result of these sort of inauthentic posts. So it's not good for anybody. You know, who is responsible? Who is responsible in this area? Well, there's a number of people who are engaged in generating what could end up being hidden advertising, starting with the brand or the producer of the product who's commissioning it and ultimately wants to benefit from the ads that they're causing to be displayed. Sometimes there'll be marketing agencies involved. Often that's the case, and then you might get a review writer or influencer, and then sometimes there's a platform who displays the content that consumers and other business customers see. Now, when we are enforcing, we would regard all of those people as being part of, you know, they're responsible. Actually, everyone's responsible in their own sphere for making sure the end result that customers see is not hidden advertising. It's not unlawful and misleading in some way. So what are the problems with reviews? Well, obviously, incentivizing a positive review can be a real problem, can't it? Because sometimes you see this. You give me a 5-star review and I'll give you a room upgrade or something like that. So this can happen in the business-to-business space as well as the business-to-consumer space. If you're trying to make some kind of benefit dependent on giving a good review, so particularly influencing the content of the review. And sometimes where people are engaged in influencer marketing, in a way, that's what could be said to be happening. You know, you're giving somebody a payment to talk about your product, not to give a kind of impartial assessment of what it's like, but to talk about it. And so that could be very much like an incentivized positive review. And what we say is, well, if you're going to give somebody a free gift, or if there's a payment, whether the end viewer is a consumer or a business, you need to make clear that it's an advert. So use #advert, for example, or you know, state that it's an advertising feature or something like that, so that people know what's going on. Sometimes people engage in the really naughty practice of providing or buying fake reviews. Now, this is a squarely illegal practice, and I'm actually surprised that it goes on, because it's so dishonest. Sometimes people have got all sorts of justifications for it. So we came across the practices of a search engine optimization company, for example, which was commissioning fake reviews, not so much because they wanted to influence customer behavior because they saw the review, but to improve their search rankings. And this was really about manipulation of an algorithm so that their customer's product would appear more highly up a list of other results. But we've since then come across quite an active market for rogues of rogues selling fake review services. You pay me some money and I will write you a load of fake reviews, and it doesn't matter what the content is. I'll just write positive stuff, and of course that's completely illegal. And again, influencer marketing, there is a risk, isn't there, that influencer marketing tips into that kind of really bad practice. If you say, look, I'll talk about your product, don't really care about the product, just pay me money and I will say how wonderful it is. It's just a fake review. And then sometimes we've come across the problem of editing out negative reviews where there's perhaps moderation going on, and the customer perhaps wasn't happy with their initial product. Sometimes what's happened is, there are a whole load of negative reviews which are sitting there on the system, but they haven't been published. And the moderator will go to the business about whom the review is written and say, look, do you want to resolve this problem? And that can be a useful service, I suppose. They'll give the business the opportunity to resolve the problem, and then maybe they won't publish the review. But of course, the problem there is that the customer doesn't see the full picture. It's useful to know whether the initial experience was not a very good one, even though it's been resolved later, because most people probably would rather have a great experience from the start rather than an experience which is okay but only after a bit of toing and froing. So editing out negative reviews, we think, is a problem as well. So all of these things are generally sort of in the area of influencing people's decision making, and influencer marketing is one aspect of that. And what I want to get us to think about really today is, when could influencer marketing be really just a type of fake review? When is it a problem? So here is an example which we've made up. This is not a real person, but what do you think could be the problem with this? I hesitate to get interaction because maybe everyone's shy and they don't want to say anything. But have a think about it for yourself. What is the problem with this post, this fake Instagram type post? What do you think? Have a look at it and see what you think the problem is. While you do, I'll have a sip of tea. Well, the big problem is that this nowhere indicates that it's an advertisement. And this influencer is probably being paid or has some other kind of commercial relationship with this fake brand, this made-up brand, Eye Trainers London. And you can see that because usually where people have this brand relationship, they will have some kind of discount code that they can use. And this looks like a classic incentivized endorsement. And you get this across a whole load of different sectors of the economy. People will talk about things, and it doesn't say advert. Now, obviously, if this person didn't have a commercial relationship and they really wanted to talk about their great running experience with their shoes, that would be an authentic post. It would be a nice thing to see, and you would find that a useful piece of information. Here is an athlete who you follow, and they're talking about this great pair of shoes, and that's useful information. It's much less useful if they've just been paid to talk about it. And if they have been paid to talk about it, and, fair enough, it's an advert. People see adverts all the time. Nobody complains about seeing an advert, but you want to know it's an advert. And that's really the problem. And that, in a nutshell, encapsulates what needs to happen with influencer marketing. There should never be any kind of deception. It shouldn't be an inauthentic post, which is giving the impression that there's a real kind of interest or a genuine interest which is not being influenced in any way by a commercial relationship or remuneration or gifts or loans or anything like that. If that, unless that's the case, if it's the case that it's something is being influenced in that way, then just make it clear. Say it's an advertisement. I could just stop there because that's what needs to happen. That's the same whether you're targeting consumers or businesses or anyone else in between.
Jason, can I ask? I mean, in a B2B space,
yeah.
I mean, typically that there are lots of brands that want to work with influencers, and we were talking about this earlier. If somebody's written a favorable blog for a brand, or they've been involved in a research and suggested working with that organization, there doesn't seem to be the same level of scrutiny in the B2B marketing space as there is in the B2C space. And therefore, maybe the guidelines aren't so clear.
Yeah.
And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I think you're right. So it is fair to say that the CMA has focused on business to consumer advertising. And as I said at the outset, that's where the bulk of my work has been. We have not tended to do much work investigating marketing which is specifically directed to businesses. Although, I mean, the law is not particularly different, all right? And I'm going to talk about some of the similarities and differences actually now.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose you can put it crudely. You might get away with it more easily if you're going to deceive businesses, in the sense that there may be fewer enforcement regulators kind of looking at this with their beady eyes. But that's not a really good reason to do it, of course, is it?
No. Well, I mean, if you think about the financial sector, let's just take a financial advisor influencer. You've got the issues around the Financial Conduct Authority, haven't you, about seem to be recommending and without being a proper qualified individual. So there are separate issues around that as well. So it's about making sure that you are clear and transparent.
Yes, that's right. And certainly in financial services, the definition of a consumer, it can include a small business. It can include people who are acting in the course of a business. So if you're influencing their decision making, then you'd need to be regulated by the FCA. If you're acting as a kind of introducer, I think people really need to be careful if they're going to promote financial services products, because they may be committing an offence and they'll fall foul of the FCA.
Yeah, indeed.
So the law, I wanted to set out kind of first of all what the consumer protection law is, because that helps to give some context for what I said about business protection. So consumer protection is the consumer protection from unfair trading regulations. It sets out broadly these prohibitions: so misleading actions, so stating something is untrue, or saying something which is untrue, or it's deceptive even if it's literally true. Misleading omission, so failing to disclose that you have received a payment or a gift or a loan. So that, they kind of read as quite granular prohibitions. Then you've got this general lack of professional diligence sort of prohibition. And then there are a set of banned practices. So falsely representing oneself as a consumer, or using editorial content in the media to promote a product, whether a trader has paid for the product, the promotion, without making that payment clear. And throughout all of this is the concept of the trader, that the trader encompasses the brand, encompasses the marketing agency. Remember back to that sort of diagram I had of people who are involved. The trader would include the influencer and the platform who displays the content. So all of these people are going to be responsible for things being said, but brands need to be particularly aware that they are responsible for what influencers write on their behalf, even if they don't actively exercise control over it. And that's an important distinction that people sometimes worry about, because ASA regulation tends to apply only where you are exercising control, but the law generally doesn't have that distinction. So that's the consumer protection legislation. And of course, the consequences include criminal prosecution, a civil court order, ASA adjudication, and their so-called wall of shame. If you don't sort your life out, the content can be removed by the brand, and your reputation could be damaged, whether you're the marketer, the brand, or the influencer. So that's the consumer protection legislation. So business to business law is set out in the business protection from misleading marketing regulations primarily, and this prohibits misleading advertising. Now, advertising is cast very broadly, right? It's basically any sort of statement really, and this is the relevant prohibition. Regulation 3.2: advertising is misleading, which in any way, including its presentation, deceives or is likely to deceive the traders to whom it's addressed or whom it reaches, and by reason of its deceptive nature is likely to affect their economic behavior, or for those reasons injures or is likely to injure a competitor. So that's what the law says about business to business. And although the words are different, it has broadly the same effect as misleading actions and misleading omissions, and to some extent professional diligence, and indeed the banned practices, except you would substitute the concept of trader as the end viewer for the consumer. So
just one quick question. I've got Keith that says the last bullet, what is covered by media?
Hang on a minute, is that on my previous slide?
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Maybe is was it?
Oh yeah, editorial content in the media. Yeah, so media, this is a banned practice. It's legislation which has been articulated across the European Union, and this is what it says. So to understand what does media mean, the starting point is just to look at this literally. So if what is media? So any media, I think, literally is a means of communication. So using any editorial content in any means of communication to promote a product, rather than having some kind of term of art. Now, it may be that if you looked at other language versions of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, you might get a nuance on this. But I've never done so, so I'm not able to say whether there's some nuance which might be suggested by looking at the French version of the legislation.
Well, obviously, that's a good point that you've just raised there, actually, because one of the real big challenges with influencer marketing is being global, and different countries have different advertising regulations, don't they? So how does that work from your perspective?
Well, so I should have said this actually at the start. So these bits of law, so the consumer protection regulations and the business protection from misleading marketing regulations, are European laws. So the law is broadly speaking the same across the EU. Now, the difference between business protection legislation and the consumer protection legislation is you could have actually more stringent protections in some European states for business marketing, because it isn't what's called a full harmonization directive. The consumer protection legislation just sets the law across the EU. It's one of those pieces of law that some politicians get frustrated by, because it means they can't then come up with some new law of their own to give extra protection. We couldn't. Obviously, now we can if we want to. Whereas with business protection, it's a minimum harmonization directive which underpins that, and so countries could go beyond it. And I think this illustrates part of the problem that brands and other marketers have if they want to advertise across multiple jurisdictions, that you might have special rules which apply in one jurisdiction and not in other ones. I mean, for example, I went to an interesting talk given by a colleague from Italy a couple of years ago, who was talking about the history of comparative advertising in Italy. And I understand from that talk that it used to basically be illegal to operate comparative advertising in Italy. And so there isn't a strong tradition of doing so. But now, of course, because of European legislation, that's been deregulated. And now people can engage in comparative advertising as long as they comply with the business protection from misleading marketing regulations, or the Italian version of those, I should say. So yes, you can have all sorts of funny little rules in many different jurisdictions. So I suppose the best thing to do is to research it. There's no quick shortcut, I'm afraid. But generally speaking, if you follow what I'm saying here, then you're going to be all right, I think, in most jurisdictions, because generally speaking, the upshot of what, the application of the law is broadly speaking the same in all the jurisdictions I've looked at. So, for example, in the USA or in Canada, they have very similar laws to one another on this, and their law in substance is more or less the same as ours. And likewise across the EU, the law is more or less the same. So anyway, going back to the wait, just let me look at Keith's follow-up.
He's talking about payments for white papers. So for you were talking about B2B. So somebody, if you've got somebody, but there's no payment being involved, but clearly there might well be some form of recommendation because they're in there. Where does that come from a legal perspective?
Yeah, so I think in the B2B context, we'd be looking at this wording, which I've got on the screen now, which is the question of whether the advertising is likely to deceive the traders to whom it's addressed or whom it reaches. And I think the concept of deception is exactly the same as we find in the consumer protection regulations. It's not actually different. And therefore, one would be looking at the same problem, that if you're incentivized to promote something, endorse it, or otherwise talk about it in a positive way, you need to disclose that's not just an ordinary off your own back kind of endorsement, right? You need to disclose. It's best to do that by saying this is an advertisement. That's clear, and that's what people would expect, I think.
One of our speakers earlier was saying that she's like an Ericsson ambassador. So she didn't overtly say it #advert or ad, but she did say brought to you as an ambassador for Ericsson or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember if she actually said that she was paid for that, but I think it was more about it was she was trying to be transparent about what she was doing by not necessarily saying #ad. Personally.
I mean it people find it difficult, I think, because they don't want to give the impression that everything they're writing is just an advertisement. I think that's the difficulty.
That's
right?
True. That is true.
So legally, it's very straightforward. If you're writing something and you're a brand ambassador, or you've received any kind of gift, loan, payment, anything like that, you should say this is an advertisement. The difficulty is that people don't want to do that. So they say, okay, is it enough to? And then they'll come up with some kind of concatenation of things that they think they might be able to do instead. And the difficulty, I think, from my perspective, sitting here as a regulator, is I can't say, yeah, that is okay, actually, because I don't think it is. I think really you should be disclosing the content as an advertisement. And there are risks if you don't. And I think what people are gambling against is that people like us or the ASA might not notice it, or we might not be interested, or in the end it might go to court and we lose. There we go. That's the kind of gamble I think people are taking here. But our position has always been clear, and the ASA's position is clear, is if you've got any kind of commercial relationship with a brand, you need to disclose your statements about that brand or its products as adverts, and everyone understands that, and that's nice and clear. If you've got some kind of other thing going on there, I think err on the side of caution and do that. I wouldn't advise people to take kind of a shortcut. And I think one of the reasons why is that all of this stuff is actually criminal. These are criminal offences which can take place. So breaches of the business protection legislation is also a criminal offence, and the enforcers can get injunctions against you. There are no blacklisted practices, all right? So that point about the media, that set of wording does not appear in the business protection regulations.
But you were talking about fake followers a little while ago, and that's an area that I feel very, very strongly about. One of the challenges there is that there are companies, as you probably know, that are purporting an entire service based upon buying fake followers, fake views, everything. And I just wondered, why cannot we get rid of these companies? Why can we not shut them down? It's because what it's doing is everybody wants to grow their own social media profile, and they're tempting some of the early, suddenly you've got 1,000 followers on a social media platform, and that if you reach a certain level, you're going to get paid. So it's almost dangling the carrot out there, and I just wonder what can be done about stopping these companies, because arguably I just talk about it being fraud, because you're totally doing this, what you've just said here. You are misleading somebody about your actual value and worth.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair point that some of this stuff can be fraud. I think, and indeed, it's interesting, if not necessarily in the influencer marketing space, but where trading standards prosecute for breaches of the consumer protection regulations, very often they'll bring a fraud charge as an alternative or an additional element to that. Of course, for fraud, you need to prove dishonesty, which you don't need to do for these offences. So you get a commensurately more serious sentence if you're found guilty of fraud. But yes, you're right. It is, I think, in many ways fraudulent, and certainly if somebody is trying to get paid business by exaggerating the number of followers they've got, and they're misleading businesses, then I think they would fall foul of this legislation, the Regulation 3.2 offence, because they would be making an advertising statement to potential customers, which is likely to deceive them and affect their economic behaviour. In other words, you would then be paid money for posting about a product when in reality you don't have 5 million followers, you've got 5 or whatever. So yes, it is a problem. I think probably, realistically, the challenge is lack of enforcement resource. Totally. I think that's the thing, and enforcers tend to prioritize things. And where one's dealing with the ASA, for example, generally speaking, they would probably focus more on consumer advertising, and as indeed would we, I think. But the ASA can speak for themselves about their scope of activity. But certainly, this is a piece of legislation which the CMA can enforce if we felt that it was important enough to do so, and trading standards could as well. So that's the law on business-to-business activities. And I thought it'd be helpful now just to talk about what this could look like in practice. And here I've drawn some examples really from what we've done in the consumer protection space. But I think it's, because that's what we've done. But I think it's helpful for people to understand what the law would mean. And people might find it helpful to be reminded of this work anyway. So one of the things which we've done is working with a number of influencers who pledged to make clear when they were paid to endorse something, or when their brand has given them freebies or something. And we in the ASA have produced guides for influencers and brands. And I think if you follow those guides, they're very simple, easy to read guides, very short and succinct. In a business-to-business context, you will be comfortable that you will comply with the law, all right, because the law, as I say, is not materially different. So I'd advise people to do that. And essentially, influencers should be setting up the relationship in a way which is clear and prominent, upfront and non-ambiguous. And the first thing that audiences see, whether the audience is intended to be a consumer or a business. And indeed, in some circumstances, it's going to be both, isn't it? I mean, if you're advertising, well, it depends what it is, isn't it? But if you're advertising some products, the customer might well be a business. Other customers might well be consumers. There's other things which are going to be more squarely targeted at businesses as well. So that's the key thing. So saying this is an advertisement is what people need to see. So things that which we think you should do is use hashtag advert. The ASA did some research about what people understand by advertisement. I think they found that generally speaking, people understand advert better than they understand ad.
Yeah, that's the universal thing that everybody uses, hashtag ad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I even went to an event where they got T-shirts printed with hashtag ad on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's clearly better than nothing, but I don't know. I mean, there's all sorts of other ways that people try to comply. So whether it's to say I'm a brand ambassador or gifted or I don't know, paid partnership. There's different things that people use. It may be that some of those are okay and people understand them, but all I'm saying is that if you want to be safe, then say use hashtag advert, because that is what everybody understands and it's nice and clear. And that's whatever the post is. So vlogs, stories, other posts, anything. You should say hashtag advert. And one of the things which I've been asked about before is to do with stories, because stories disappear. Can people see them? Yes, we can see them. And indeed, we periodically monitor stories. And then we can see when people are not making disclosures. So, there we go. We can see. So it's not like it's a safe harbor where people can really get away with it. We have all sorts of investigative tools that we use. And we think that people should use that disclosure where something has been given or loaned as well. It's still an advertisement, whether people have had a loan. Now, you may want to specify that it was a free gift or it was on loan from or something like that, just to make clear to your followers that you haven't been paid. And it could be a relevant thing. Somebody's been given a gift. Well, fair enough, they've been given a gift. But and I say that because some people have complained some influencers and marketers and brands have complained in the past that they think that there's a difference between paying somebody to say something and then giving them, and on the other hand, giving them a free gift or a loan. And yeah, I can see what they're saying there, but we still think it's an advertisement. Same if it's an own brand product. So you get a lot of people who want to big up their own product. And their defense would be, well, I think people know that I own this brand or whatever. No, people don't necessarily know that you own the brand. There was the example from the ASA of Alan Sugar, wasn't there? He promoted a brand which he had a share in, but I don't think people particularly knew. I can't remember what it was now. Some kind of product, wasn't it? Tooth whitening, or who knows?
Yes.
Yeah. People just assumed that he was, he was talking about a product that he'd used, but he whether he'd used it or not, the fact is he had a financial interest in it. So whenever somebody's got a financial interest, they should promote that this is an advert if they're promoting it, rather than just talking about it and not saying anything. And people should also only give genuine reviews. So if they haven't used a product, they shouldn't imply that they have. And they certainly should not claim results they haven't experienced themselves. And I remember there was a while back, there was some investigation that I was interviewed about. It was to do with cosmetic surgery, I think, that had taken place overseas. And some of these influencers were being required under their contracts to say they had a wonderful experience, when apparently some of them didn't. They had a really rubbish experience. And of course, they should not, even if their contract says it, they should not say, oh, I had a wonderful experience, if that's not true. So all of these things are the same, whether it's B2B advertising or whether it's B2C advertising. There's no difference. All of this stuff is the same. And then what to avoid is all of this. I could go through it, but it's the opposite of this. Some things that people try to do. So going back to that example, sometimes people just tag the brand, or they use a discount code, or they use language like "thank you," made possible by. Sometimes people want to hide the hashtag. I think this was a real example that I saw once, that somebody had Adidas ad, which I thought was quite interesting, because it's quite hard to see that that's an ad because there's so many A's and D's in Adidas. You'd sort of easily miss it. But that's other piece. I don't have anything for Adidas, by the way. It's just an example. But sometimes people will use advert, but they'll hide it in some way. So they'll hide it amongst other text, or they'll have it on sort of light coloured font on a white background, or I suppose dark coloured font on a dark background. It's another naughty thing that people sometimes do. These are all things which just aren't clear and upfront disclosure, and really people should avoid these, because it is misleading. For people. So brands obviously, when they're entering into this relationship with influencers, whether they're selling to consumers or to businesses, ought to be fairly proactive, I think. So I've listened to some brands who say, well, we just send out a load of freebies and we don't monitor them, or they reckon they're working with too many influencers to check what they're doing. I mean, on the one hand, I think that's probably nonsense, because it would be mad and insane, I think, to spend a whole load of money on influencer marketing and not monitor the effectiveness. I don't actually believe them. But in any event, it's not an excuse. If you're using influencer marketing, you should be checking what the influencers are saying and making sure that they are doing the right thing. So in the contracts, I dare say this probably still goes on, but I've come across businesses asking influencers to hide their commercial relationship, and they might try and put that in the contract, which obviously that's not allowed, that's illegal. And they should, in the contract, require disclosure and make sure that the influencer only makes factual claims which can be verified, because it's on the brand at the end of the day. If they can't verify the claim that's being made about the product, then that's a problem for them.
Of course.
Monitoring the influencer conduct is important. So keeping records of who's received incentives, monitoring what they say. Instagram have introduced some tools as a result of some of our work with them, which should make it easier for brands to monitor. So you can now see much more easily who's saying what about you. So you can keep an eye on it, actually. And if people are talking about your brand and they're not disclosing that it's an advert, then that's a problem, and you need to do something about it. And that leads on to the what do you do? So you have the contract in place, do the monitoring. Do you just turn a blind eye? No, we think brands should be enforcing their contracts and requiring changes, or even requesting takedowns if they see things are wrong, and making sure that their staff understand the legal requirements. They read our guide. So as I say, our guide, and also the one which the ASA have produced with us, is very helpful, I think, and succinct. It's not an onerous read. It's not like some complicated legal advice. No, it isn't. It's got some visuals in, and it's, even though it's directed at B2C, it's good for business to business advertising as well. It's the same set of principles, even though the law is slightly different. And then platforms. I mean, there's not many platforms, but insofar as there are platforms who are interested in this, what should platforms be doing? Well, it's these things, which are the things that we asked Instagram to do, which is to make it easy to label ads. I mean, sometimes influencers are new to all of this, right? I mean, obviously everyone starts somewhere, and sometimes the problem is that people don't quite realize what they're supposed to do. So giving clear advice and making it easy to label things, and then of course prompting the influencer to label something if it looks like it might be hidden advertising. So Instagram use an algorithm to identify whether something looks like a hidden ad. So before you post it, they'll say, "Are you sure this is not a hidden ad?" or whatever it is, whatever phrase they use. And if it isn't, well, you can confirm, no, it's not hidden advertising. There's no incentive. I'm going to publish it anyway. That's fine. But when something is a suspected hidden advert and it's been posted, then the brand needs to be notified. They need to know that this is what's happening, and then enable the brand to request a takedown if necessary. So that should help people to comply with the law. And we've done more work recently with Facebook, Instagram, and eBay on fake reviews. I don't actually know whether this encompasses people selling fake followers in some way. I think most of this is focused on fake reviews, so business to consumer reviews. But in principle, I don't see any reason why there should be a different set of rules if somebody is selling a fake follower service. I can increase your followers using bots or something like that to make it look like you've got loads of followers. Insofar as that happens, then maybe that would fall within the scope of this work.
Absolutely.
And we have this arrangement with Facebook and indeed eBay that they will put in place these measures to stop these problems from reappearing. So suspending and banning users, using automated processes to identify this and make it harder for people to find these sort of misleading fake review groups. I mean, they've taken down a huge number of groups. What was it? 60? They took down 16,000 groups in April this year, which is quite a lot.
Oh my God.
So, and we're very active in this area at the moment. So, I mean, if people have real concerns about this, I would suggest have a look at our case pages and the agreed measures that we've got with Facebook, which are all on our website, and see what you think. And you can always complain to the CMA and say, look, I've identified this person who's selling fake follower services. But maybe you could also raise it with Facebook directly, and then they ought to use the process which we've put in place, really. So I think that's broadly it. These are the guides for influencers, and there's a blog and some other guidance which we've done with the ASA. That's it. So we finished a bit earlier than I knew we wouldn't take up the whole hour. So I'm not quite sure whether there's any more questions or if people want to ask anything else.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Jason, to be fair. Really, really helpful. And I know that there's a whole load of people that will want to watch this on catch up, because not everybody is available for all parts of the day. But I know I've fielded quite a few comments from people that said there's other sessions available. And I think when yours is so educational based, and also knowing that you've got those guides as well, which is super helpful. Will we be able to get a copy of the slides as well? Because
I'm sure you can. Yeah, I can send those over. Yeah,
that would be really helpful. I know Keith and one or two others are in here. I don't know if Keith is still around. One quick one: where do you see the future focus from regulators going when it comes to this area? It's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, I think the ASA are very active in this space. That's clear. So the ASA, I think, are going to keep on issuing adjudications in this area, and I think continuing to crack down on influencers who just don't make disclosure. And really, we've all been looking at this for so long now, and there's so much in the kind of public sphere about what the rules are. There's not really an excuse, I think, for influencers not to label their adverts.
Unless there is a greater level of enforcement when people, because I think one of the difficulties, and obviously I'm very much involved in the space, as you know, is if others get away with it, then what sort of lesson is it bringing to the, and I'm talking particularly about fashion and beauty in particular, which is huge. And I see loads and loads of what are clearly paid partnerships or even gifted partnerships without any form of labeling whatsoever. So I think it's what helps is dare I say it, and I've said it a few times before, is more public shaming. I mean, the work that you did, which got into the mainstream media, I think in 2019 with the really big influence was magnificent. But we've got to keep doing it, and maybe it's the annual shaming awards.
yeah. Although I wouldn't want to give people the extra oxygen perhaps for their own advertising campaigns. I don't see enforcement in this area kind of lightening up really. I mean, obviously there is always a sort of whack-a-mole problem. Where there are so many people who want to be influencers and are influencers, and people don't comply and so on, and sometimes people have fairly small numbers of followers, and I don't know. I mean, they make a mistake and that's it. I think it's a real problem if you get influencers with large followings who don't comply. I think it is really these guys have to take responsibility for really following the law. I mean, they're well remunerated people. They can afford to get some proper advice on this. I don't think it's an excuse to say, well, I'm just an influencer, I can't understand the law. Although that is sometimes what we hear from people, particularly when they're new to it. But I think there's not really a good excuse there. The government is consulting on some amendments to the law to make the law even clearer. There we go. That's possibly going to happen. But I think the law is, on the whole, it does the job, doesn't it, at the moment? And really, I think the difficulty is that people just don't want to comply. They don't want to give the impression they're just producing loads of adverts and their whole life is just about marketing other people's products.
And that's also because of the way the media publicizes the word influence. These people are just promoting anything left, right, and center. And unfortunately, that may be the case with some, but a large percentage of people that are really smart, influential people, dare I say, content creators, entrepreneurs, doing a great job in promoting, giving their own advice and opinion. This is making it difficult for them when other people in the sector don't do it. A Dad Blog UK, John Adams, for example, a classic example of a great content creator, always doing things properly. And it grates on him when other people in his sector are just not.
It is a pity, and I agree. I think it's a shame because people put a lot of effort into creating good content, and I think the customers deserve to know when great content is an advert, right? I think it just shows respect to people to say, look, this is an advert. It's still good content, perhaps, but it's an advert, and people can see that. Other stuff is great content, and it's not an advert, and then people can enjoy looking at that, and they can take decisions about what they want to do with it. So I think it is about respecting one's followers as well as actually complying with the law and avoiding enforcement action.
Yeah.